everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast from Backlot Banter where we review every single Palme d'Or winner, and today we are going back to the year that we love that has a million winners, more like 11, but it's 1945, the first year of the Cannes Film Festival, and today the film from that year that we get is Brief Encounter, directed by David Lean, starring Celia Johnson, Trevor Howard, Stanley Holloway. This is a train movie. I'll just say it right out the front.
Sure.
This is a movie that centers around the life of the train, or rather, the life of the characters and their interactions with the train. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. You guys probably don't need to hear anything more from me because I have that covered out just about the one thing that matters to. No, we're going to talk about the film. We are going to discuss all the little nuances of this film. It's David Lean. You know why I like David Lean, but do we like the film? That is more important. But first, I got to remind you of what we did last week because we talked about The Conversation, Francis Ford Coppola's 1974 film, and we decided that that one was quite excellent. It went very far up on our list with a score of 9.1. We decided that it would be at the number 4 place after a little bit of litigation. And so it is between Anatomy of a Fall and above, well, in between Anatomy of a Fall on the top side and Taxi Driver on the bottom side. So there you have it. I recommend you watch that review to have your mind filled with all kinds of juicy
Watch that
thoughts.
movie too. I saw that there's a 4K restoration maybe coming to theaters towards now or the end of the year.
That
so
really?
new Criterion restoration that is out online and on disc is pretty good looking. Okay, but enough of that. Let's maybe hit the comments. We didn't quite get the episode out in time for this recording, but Abram, did you have something
on there
to
now?
pull?
It's been up for approximately 5 minutes.
I do have. So here's the thing. I have today actually an exchange in the comments. What I like about our comment section is that it promotes discussion here.
Mhm.
This is a post, a retort, and another reply to the retort on our review of Red One.
Oh,
exciting!
This is good. I know what you're doing. This is good. Please continue.
I have not read this one.
The first comment comes from Zachary O'Brien 7328, who says, "Great movie, family, enjoy it."
Great movie, family, enjoy it. Hey, I didn't enjoy it. Tucker did, and Tucker and I did that review. We didn't enjoy it, but I can see how it might be, draw a family in.
A family
though there
enjoy
are
it.
some better offerings in theaters now, I will say.
And then we get a reply here from Goran22, who says, "You're not a bot." And then Zachary replies to this saying, "No."
Very, very interesting.
So it's to me, it is a it is an affirmation that we are cultivate humanist connection in the BLB comments.
I tend to agree.
No, Abram, if you look at your phone one more time, I think that the final comment, the no there, has a translate to English little option there for you. Go ahead and click on that. Yeah, it's not gonna translate anything. I just found that interesting. in that exchange.
It does change. It goes from Goran22. He is at Goran22. No. If you hit translate to English, it says the same thing, but one space is removed between Goran and
Very
no.
interesting. That's a different
there you
language.
Yeah, that is a different language.
It
that's
indicates.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that very compelling. I'm going to give that a creator heart.
Sound off in the comments. Go ahead, you get that creator. Sound off in the comments if you are also not a bot.
We would like to know.
Yeah.
Tanner.
And of course, reply to the other people who aren't bots.
Yeah, and just say, "Hey, you are not a bot." It's kind of a CAPTCHA test between friends.
What's a CAPTCHA test amongst friends?
Tanner, would you kick us off by giving a little plot synopsis of this Brief Encounter by David Lean?
Give us a brief synopsis.
Brief Encounter is a film that follows mostly Laura Jessen, who is a British housewife in, it's like post-war Britain or like pre-war Britain, or is this like an alternate universe where the war didn't happen? I'm not really sure.
It feels like post-war, but it's also 1945, so we're kind of just ignoring the war in this movie.
Yeah, I guess
it doesn't actually affect anything.
Laura has a husband and a couple wonderful kids, and she is going about her life fairly happy. She goes down to the shops, sees some movies. Who among us can't relate to that kind of story?
True.
You know, that kind of person. But it happens that she runs into Dr. Alec. Hang on, Dr. Alec Harvey, Dr. Alec Harvey.
True.
And he also is married, has some kids, but they form a sort of irreconcilable connection that blossoms into something that's very romantic, but they have to hide it, obviously. They both have their own lives, they both have their own families, but the connection between them is so strong, and tragedy strikes when Harvey must ultimately ship off to Johannesburg. He is a doctor of some kind, as I said. He studies diseases. General practitioner. That's right. Thank you. And so he must leave, and so this connection that was always sort of like bubbling beneath the surface, and they're fretting about whether they could, whether they'd be caught, is suddenly ripped apart. It is a relatively brief encounter that they must reconcile with, and their emotions surrounding it.
Tucker, you wanna give us your initial thoughts to kick our little talk off here?
Finally, he's given it to me first. Never happens. I'll take it. I'll run with it.
I know you wanted it. I know you wanted it.
I think this is a great movie because it's laser focused. This is about one thing, and it does that very, very well. This is a straight down the line romance drama, and with two very compelling leads delivering great performances with some good lines and some, I think, exceptional moments of cinematography and lighting. And I just really liked it. I think that it stirs up a couple of themes that I'm excited to get into, but otherwise I think it's just really well crafted and really focused, which is why I loved it. It doesn't attempt to be more complex or attempt to have necessarily a bunch of layers about like politics and stuff that we, in almost every other one of the movies we talked about on this show, it's like, oh, what is this spider web and just 60 other things? Like, no, this is just about interpersonal communication and I think grief mostly. And so, yeah, I like this movie quite a bit.
Abram, what did you think?
Yes.
Yeah, I loved it. I really had a great time with Brief Encounter. I think one of the benefits of narrowing your focus this much and also being David Lean, so you're being a very good filmmaker, is that it's just easy to nail something like this.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean it's easy to make a movie this good, but I think when you have just a very particular goal, as Tucker is saying, I think that lets you really think about acting and think about shot composition and blocking a scene and the script and funnel everything towards a singular purpose, which is, Tucker, as you're sort of alluding to, cultivating this very interesting and I think in some ways fairly complicated emotional landscape, because ultimately, this is a movie about cheating and
adultery.
They do, they
might say.
They adulter in this movie. They just straight up do adulter. And I think watching that sort of reach its apex and have both the characters move beyond the point of no return and seeing them both have to reckon with that choice in different ways, I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
If this film wasn't 80 minutes long, I think it wouldn't have captivated me as much because there really is not a ton of material, and the situation between them is actually quite straightforward.
Yeah.
But again, because it has a narrow focus, a short run time, and everything is funneling towards this one goal, it's very effective for what it is.
Tanner, up next.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything so far, and I really appreciate to something that Abram was just talking about, hitting the adulterers hard and the adultery hard in this movie. We really want to do that. Is that it never moralizes, which many other lesser films do, and obviously that
especially
is
of the time.
Point. Yeah, well, exactly. Especially films like that is kind of the point, is that they are moralizing, but it is just such a refreshing breath of air to see a film that's like, yes, these people have this intense romantic connection, and like above all else, that is what is most important, but they are still committed to their families, and that is the internal conflict that they have. But also, we're not doing oh, they're unhappy at home, or oh, her husband neglects her or like even abuses her or anything like that. Like, no, they have very happy home lives. It's just like striking this really intense connection with a random stranger, and how that burns and almost engulfs your entire being, and how that can weigh so heavily on the life that you have built beforehand. I think this is a very emotionally intense movie that I enjoyed quite a bit. It's obviously very concentrated into that, sub 90-minute runtime. And perhaps more than any film that we've watched or reviewed in recent memory, in my notes here, I wrote down a lot of quotes from the characters because I think this screenplay by Noel Coward is very powerful and very tight and really, really packs a punch.
I'm going to agree with all of y'all about this one. I think Tanner's right. I'm going to hone in on the screenplay for this. I think this film has a very excellent use of point of view and voiceover, two things that are combining very expertly to create a very interior film, one that's very much from Laura's point of view, that we understand her complex thoughts through the voiceover, which I believe is one of the best written voiceover tracks that I've listened to, because it at moments feels to me like I'm reading a book, like I'm reading the words of a character that is
Reading
written.
a diary.
Yeah, and it's like voiceover is so hard because you often tread into this just like obviousness trap where you're just like writing, the characters are saying things that you just totally understand, you totally see on screen, and so you're getting double coverage on this information, and it's a waste of the voiceover. But this one is constantly interjecting and adding new things and allowing Laura to contradict what's happening in the scene, and to have her this very British notion of like the stoic or the smiling face on the outside, and the complete opposite thinking about somebody or some situation on the inside. And so the character dynamics, the setting, and I think just the screenplay really elevate this film. It's very good. It's not my favorite David Lean, because I have to give that to a film, another film of note that he made.
Which one is that, Timo? Passage to India. Passage to India. That's right. That's
Big Ryan's daughter
favorite
guy.
But this one has some moments in it that are just like hit you with an emotion like none else. So the filmmaking is really doing that quality. So
I just want to clarify for the audience, Timo's favorite movie is Lawrence of Arabia. We cannot expect everyone to have watched the Question of the Bestest Best Picture series, which is actually not on this YouTube channel. So there's actually a lot of context there.
There's a playlist somewhere you can navigate to it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold their hand to this
Lean.
crap,
That's my predisposition going into this film. So yeah.
Well, I think that this movie is special to me because I respect David Lean for him being a master of spectacle craft in the majority of his films that he's well known for.
Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia are extremely different movies than this one.
And the other one I've seen of his, Dr. Zhivago, again, also another big sort of epic sprawling film. But this is a interpersonal, mostly shot on sound stages, romance drama that's 80 minutes long. And I'm like, wait, this guy can cover both bases. And it's a really nice sort of refreshing aperitif to the filmography of Mr. David Lean, who I have respected the films of, but not personally really enjoyed. But this one definitely grabbed me and showed me that there's something about him as a director I can really, really personally appreciate.
I think that to go back to the voiceover, part of the reason it works so well, I think, is because of the focus of the film.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have a very simple plot, a very simple relationship we're unpacking, but also we really confine the parameters of this relationship to a couple key locations. We're in the train station, we're maybe in the movie theater, we're in the restaurant, we're in the downtown area. I believe this was initially a play that was turned into the script for this film.
It definitely feels like that.
You can definitely feel that in the limited number of locations. And I think that because there's this almost claustrophobic sense to the scale of the film, because we're so singularly focused on the implication of this relationship, every element, as I was saying, feeds into this one mood. And so the voiceover, to me, is effective here in a way that I don't often find them effective in films that are far more plot heavy, is because here, we are singularly focused on Laura's internal headspace. And so we are always we're always in peril. We're always in a relationship moment with Alec. Even when we're at home, the home life is characterized by the relationship with Alec. We're always seeing the lead actress, who I forget the name of,
Celia Johnson.
She is always exercising different dimensions of her complicated feeling towards Alec in every scene she's in. And so having that narration as a guide through this relationship, I think, is very compelling. And I think it's a smart implementation of a voiceover. It acts a lot. It acts as an aside does in a play.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very simple way to have the interior, very small narrative feel really all-encompassing. And I think that's one of the reasons the movie really works for me, is because you can't escape the guilt and the complication of the relationship with Alec, even in its happiest moments or the moments when they're literally apart. It looms very large. We're always in that headspace.
Mm-hmm. I want to note how ingenious I think the frame story, if you will, of it. It's like,
yeah, totally.
She arrives. We start the film.
You start in end of race. It's not in medias race.
Yeah, you
this
start
is
at the end
of that
of
race.
We bookend it with the same scene.
With the same scene from a different perspective, but in the middle, the voiceover is ostensibly her on the couch at home, daydreaming or just like rehashing this whole thing to herself in her head as if she were speaking to her husband, but she is not. And so we get a lot of these like you addresses in voiceover, and you get like you get all the like first, second, and third person in the voiceover that is just you're not able to do in a lot of when you set it up otherwise. And I'll just throw in real quickly that the music, I think, is supposed to be from the radio that she turns on throughout the film. It's very continuous, like songs, not just like score pieces. And of course, it fits in the film as score, but I think it's supposed to be diegetic, which is just a cool little trick. It's like, that's hard to fit in. She goes and turns it on.
Because they're playing records of like symphonies and things.
Yeah, they're like listening to the radio or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, she turns that on right towards the beginning of the film, sits back down and sort of begins her internal monologue to speak to the performance of Celia Johnson. I think it's there's a really interesting element to it that goes back to the voiceover thing that a couple of you guys were talking about earlier, wherein a lot of times when she is by herself, or even when she's sharing wordless moments with Alec, it is her voiceover divorced from the stuff that she is doing in the scene. Like that is, she's not speaking in the scene. She is sort of identifying her feelings about or reflecting upon her feelings in that moment, which is just an added layer of complication that you're not necessarily feeling those things in the moment as an actor, but then having to reflect back on it and display all of that emotion on your face and in the voiceover at the same time. So there was just moments that really sing to me that are really just her face. Like one of the opening scene is this, like you get a lot out of that is obviously recontextualized at the end, but you can see from the very moments that this film opens and she walks in and she's sitting with Alec Harvey, that she's carrying a lot of sorrow and sorry, Dr. Harvey.
Dr. Harvey.
Yes. She's carrying so much sorrow and dread on her face. You can like kind of contextually pick up that there is something deeper beneath the surface of their relationship, but there's just multiple moments like that, especially when she is when she's on the train at multiple times. She's very like paranoid about people looking at her and having to look like she's not thinking about things. She's like, I have to read my book because I feel like people are watching me and wondering what I'm thinking and knowing that I'm up to something. And then at times she is so enraptured with her love with Alec, Dr. Harvey, that she is like, I don't care what people think. It's like, well, you shouldn't generally, Laura, but yeah, she's a very well painted character in terms of she's so worried about what others think, not just her husband or her friends, but like strangers on the train, if they know what's going on in her life.
Yeah, I think that what makes the way of the writing of the voiceover so special is that it is the frame narrative and the way it's playing with first and second person references to she's technically this is her trying to figure out how she would tell this to her husband. That is a really compelling concept just at first blush because it gives a lot of the lines sort of this reflective like, oh, you remember when I told you that? Remember when this happened and then I lied and I felt bad about it. She's getting this like we're getting this like slightly more mature, reflective look on her actions and her thoughts, but it also sometimes devolves. And I'm just kind of like remembering certain moments that really stuck with me where it's not as reflective, not as mature, where it's very much, I could imagine her imagining this in the moment and whether or not that's like the voiceover kind of shifting perspectives to like, this is what's happening in the moment, or she's just like really passionately thinking about it. So she's like remembering what she thought. But there's these moments where she gets emotional and she's thinking about what she was thinking about in the moment, and especially near the beginning when this sort of chatty lady sits down and she's like, "Oh, I could just strangle her, I could kill her." I'm like, no, I don't mean that. And it has this really interesting flow to it where she's admitting things and going back on them and sort of arguing within herself things that I'm sure not necessarily I would strangle someone, but like thoughts of like intrusive thoughts and like trying to divorce yourself from that and like these moments that we have in our own heads all the time that are very, very rarely reflected on film because narration is something we very rarely get in film, but especially this kind of narration that isn't an omnipresent, sort of God force or someone reading a book like in The Hobbit or something, but how this is her like kind of arguing with herself and working through her own thought process. I think it's really, really special.
And it reveals so much about her character through that.
Yeah.
What do you think it should have done?
I'm sorry to break up the good conversation, but what this film should have done is because they're listening to the radio, listening to records potentially, should have opened with a record scratch in her on that opening scene and her say, "Yep, that's me." I bet you're wondering how I got here.
That's the straight to Hulu adaptation remake of this.
Yes, and there are many such cases of that film that are on Hulu and Netflix and Tubi and Freevee and whatever, whoever.
Oh, man. The making of those films paid for like so many mortgages. Just think about it. Think about all the mortgages those movies paid for.
Yeah.
I also want to draw attention to one other dimension of the voiceover, which is the way that it intrudes on moments of action and sound. I think about like Blade Runner, one of my favorite films, notoriously awful voiceover track.
I've been thinking about that one myself because of how awful it is.
Immediately when Abram brought up the voiceover and how that can be a crutch or whatever, what you said at the beginning, I was like, oh, like Blade Runner.
Runner.
It was only a matter of time before I brought it up.
Yeah, right.
The part of why it doesn't work is that there are these just long moments of looking out over Los Angeles and we're listening to the voiceover. What's interesting about this is that the voiceover is very intrusive. A lot of times we'll be in a scene where there is not only just background noise, but a character speaking directly to Laura, and we'll turn that down in the mix, and we'll have the voiceover intercede the conversation in the moment. And I think it goes back to reinforcing this notion that the emotional charges she's dealing with are completely inescapable. I think that if this very good, very well written, very well performed voiceover existed solely over shots of the train returning her to home or her walking down the street, it wouldn't actually be as effective as when we have a really tight shot and there's a conversation going on that we're tuned into, and then suddenly it's like a train barreled through it. I think that that's a really critical part of how, on a filmmaking level, we reinforce the character's headspace. And there's other decisions like that we can talk about later, like that, like Dutching the camera at the end, which is
that shot's so good.
Son, I was like,
guys, that is a full arm of goosebumps thinking about that shot. You see that?
That's a gamer lean moment right there. That is we're cooking now.
That's a gamer lean 45 degrees.
We want to talk about that, or do we need to talk about the romance to lead into that, because that shot has so much emotional weight to it.
Let's pace ourselves here, gentlemen.
We want to talk about that shot real bad.
I want to talk about.
See this bit?
I want to get metaphorical
champing.
here. I want to
Okay.
get. I want to talk about some allegories here. And the very first image of this film is a train barreling through a station. First of all, I was like, well, Timo's gonna love this.
I did.
Honestly speaking, the first thought that ran through my head as soon as the movie started, as soon as that started, I was like, oh, Timo's a big fan of this. But anyway, I mean, it's a fairly simple allegory, but obviously something that Lean and Coward are really harping on in the thematics of this piece.
That's what they called us in high school, by the way.
Lean and harping.
Lean and coward. Lean and coward.
Me and Tucker.
Which is, the set forward path of life. I mean, this is 1940s UK, 1940s London or whatever. Like there's so much social expectation that is wrapped up in the society of this time that is very well translated to this film between Laura and her friends and her husband and all this stuff. Like more than anything, she's concerned about her friends finding out because what would they say? And it's not like I found it interesting because I was really juxtaposing like the American and like British perspectives on this. Because at the time, America would have had like a very religious, moralistic read on this.
Like
and while that is there in Britain,
adultery is bad because, and you fill in the American answer and the British answer.
But in Britain, it feels much more like this would be bad because it's improper. Like it's not what you're supposed to do. And I just found that allegory to ring true with the trains who are set on their straight paths and they're going places and they cannot be derailed, or they shouldn't be derailed by any whims or fleeting fancies, as they.
But at the end of the day, what's the harm in derailing a couple of trains?
I say that.
Well,
now, I've been disbarred by Tanner from getting too far ahead of ourselves, but I want to actually.
Okay.
Because I think that there's an element of the adultery that I'm having a hard time coming to a conclusion about in my head. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the film doesn't have a moral position.
I think the film has a moral position completely. Continue, Abram, but I'll jump in after you.
I mean, I think that there's something very intriguing about the fact that as the frame narrative ends and Frank goes to comfort her and asks her for if she needs anything, and she sort of collapses into his arms. It's an interesting emotional moment because ultimately I think it serves to reinforce the fact that she is entirely in the wrong. And I don't know exactly what to make of this, if we feel as though the film is extremely condemnatory of Laura or not. She herself very clearly is. I think of the line where she mentions towards the end that it's very easy to lie to somebody who trusts you implicitly, or whatever she says. And so I ultimately leave the film feeling as though, it's so interesting because Laura is so, in my view, unambiguously the villain as per the text of the film and the characters around her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the way that the final shot ends, the final kind of note of the film is her collapsing into Fred's arms, the music swells, and the end text shows up. And to me, that is actually a bit that I'm like less fond of, because I do think that it has a bit of that moralizing quality right there at the end, that like she needs to come around at the end of the film. And whether this is the wise script move, or this is a production code or whatever they had in Britain mandate that you can't show characters who do these kind of things and get away with it, her just falling such back into Fred's arms and seemingly, I mean, the film leaves us with a lot of questions about what's going to be going forward now that things are obviously different, but it does try to set itself back to where it was at the beginning when she says that I was a happily married woman until 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that in some way is less satisfying to me. I think that not really dealing with this big paradigm shift of love and of how you know, if you could feel love for multiple people, or if new love comes along and that new fire completely burns away what you had before, this film is actually not interested in answering those questions. And that's something that I think is like relevant to this story, that is just, it's not there.
Well,
And the choice to just kind of like put a bow tie on it at the end leaves me wanting just a little more from the consequences of this, because even though the consequences are very intense and they're played out emotionally through the film, any like real life or logistical or interpersonal consequences are not there. They don't happen, or at least we're not shown. The story ends beforehand.
mhm. Well, I think the fact that that is such a quick ending, like that sequence between her and Fred it's like a minute, if that.
Mhm.
And it ends and it's an action, there's no words, and we get a fade out to the credits or whatever. That to me is why I would pretty strongly disagree with this being unambiguously her being the villain, or unambiguously this is an immoral thing, because we don't know what the consequences of this are. We don't know what other characters think of this. We don't know what she will think of this. We don't know what Alec will think of this going forward. And so I see that last shot as an emotional release, but an emotional release without an answer. To your point, Timo, this film is not interested in answering about in interrogating or answering the consequences of a choice like this, or an emotional situation like this, because there aren't answers to this. There's not a clear cut answer to the complexity of human emotion, which is really what I think this movie is about struggling to balance your own desires and emotions within yourself. And so when she collapses into her husband's arms and has an emotional release of crying at the very end, I don't see that as she's crying and she's sad and therefore what she did was bad, but it was complicated and it was emotional, and a lot of her was tied up in this.
It's very gray.
And to the point, yeah, absolutely. And which is why I strongly disagree that there's like a moral stance in this, because what we saw was giving her happiness, like giving her joy to her life, and it's just the situation of being a human in a society that has norms and regulations that creates that kind of internal anxiety and the grief and the stress this movie is about. She's crying because what the hell is going to happen? How does she feel about this? She doesn't know. And I think that's really special.
It's a grand tragedy is what it is. It's there, in my mind, the conclusion of the story is what we see on screen, or as close to a conclusion as there is. Alec moves to South Africa, and they had this fleeting affair, a brief encounter, if you will.
I think they met 4 times, something like that, 5 times.
Yeah, that has left both of them deeply, irreparably, emotionally confused, and now they just both have to go back to their lives forever changed, forever knowing that they hold some deep-seated romantic interest in another person. And that's either going to
never see again, that they're agreeing to
that they'll
break
never
off
see again. And
from.
The best they can hope for is that at some point years from now that fades away and they can just focus on the person they were before they met each other. And that is deeply tragic. That is the grand tragedy of human connection, and I don't know. I don't want to be like monogamy bad or whatever, but like that is the world in which we exist in, and like again why I feel it's so important that we never see. She's not even necessarily unhappy at home. She cares about her kids. She feels deeply bad and sorrowful about what she is doing, and like this emotional or literal cheating on her husband. Like it is so emotionally fraught that I don't feel as though we are painting Laura in any particular light. It is a grand tragedy of romanticism above all else.
I think that the Dr. Friend character is that kind of moral middle ground guide who, despite it being a very awkward situation where he knows completely what's going on, that they have got, you are going to, or before he arrived back at home early, they were going to use his apartment.
Oh, you're talking about Steven?
Yeah. And so his being like, he not really approving of the adultery, but also not really like he isn't casting a lot of judgment in that scene, and he's kind of being like,
Listen, what I'll say is that I fucking hate Steven.
Disappointed.
Steven sucks.
Steven sucks.
I hate that fucker.
But his reaction to it is it's not like immediately, strongly, harshly no, which is what I think we expect. Does provide for some room for tolerance in this story of what is going on, because I think the characters provide a big argument for themselves to why they should be allowed to do this, because of the love and the feelings that they have for each other, and that ultimately like weren't shown external harm caused because it's all interior. Stephen shows us that like maybe this can happen but in the end, the society and the filmmaking code has to be like, well, no, you can't do this. Like, this is not a good thing.
Not even that, but like, you've committed years of your life to another person, and there's a lot of emotionality wrapped up in that. Like, they both have kids with other people, and they love the kids. They don't want to break up their family or whatever. And are they being selfish by seeking out this thing? Is it like they're just in the honeymoon phase with this other person? Is it actually going to work out? They have years-long tested relationships back at home, and I don't know. That's again, it goes back to like the fraughtness of the relationships. All four of them, or however many we want to tally up in this movie. I think it's all really involved.
Yeah, and I mean the question I was raising is not at all what we talked about, I don't think.
Oh, okay.
Because here's my feeling. I agree with you, Tanner, completely about what you're saying. To me, that's why the film is interesting.
Yeah.
To me, it's more so that I'm not looking to understand like the externalities of the cheating. I don't really care about that. Yeah. And I think that the film is more nuanced and better for the fact that the penance is paid internally.
Yeah.
But my feeling is
flogged.
No, and I'm not looking for, her and Frank to get a divorce. I'm also not looking for her and Alec to have a Hollywood ending, which would be in some ways quite subversive if that was the case. Mm-hmm. I think that the fact that the film exists in this space wherein on a material level, the infidelity exists only in the heart and mind of Laura is what makes it such a compelling script. My contention is just that is not an amoral narrative. The whole film exists in her head, and in her head, she very squarely, by the end of the narrative, has proclaimed at least that the acts of being unfaithful and disloyal to her husband, lying to her husband, is literally an immoral act. And I think that, to Timo's point, the framing of it, and perhaps this is just me bringing, if you can believe it, folks, I don't think adultery is good. Maybe I'm just bringing my
well, they just
framework.
decriminalized it in New York.
They did. I saw that. It was very, very interesting that it even was criminalized still. But I think that when you couple her feeling...
What's a law in like Ipswich or wherever they're from?
Flogging. It's flogging like you imagine.
It's flogging.
Tucker.
You nailed it.
Yeah, I guess.
It's flogging.
When you couple the fact that she is willingly and in her monologue admitting to herself that she is causing pain to somebody who doesn't deserve it in Frank, by ending the narrative as it does, I simply think that the film does indeed have a moral position. I think that a truly amoral version of this narrative does not end so heavy-handedly, because even in the case of Stephen, the notion of him being in British politeness, not sad but disappointed and cuttingly obvious in his accusation that Alec was there to sleep with Laura, and clearly the friendship being in some way irreparably damaged because of that, is moralizing the narrative. That's all I'm saying. I don't think that this is an amoral narrative.
No, I'm going to present this as a joke, but I do mean it. I do mean it literally that, and as a praise to the film also, that I was just so emotionally involved with our two characters that at the end of the day, I'm not Judge Buhner banging my gavel about the morals of the film. I am instead like, I feel bad for these guys above all else.
Yeah, you just feel
like
bad
like
for 'em.
that is my takeaway from it. And again,
Yeah,
why I don't
yeah.
like Steven, that he's like, oh, you took her to do eat out, easy. And he didn't say that, but
That's not the accent anyone in this movie has, but I
Nope.
appreciate it.
But like, why when he insinuates that, I was like, listen, fucker, you don't know anything about what's going on with these two.
It's
All right, well, why don't you
true
back off?
love. It's true.
Well, that's why
love.
this is why it's an interesting plot, because as you were saying at the beginning, Tanner, there are not any of these sort of traditional pretenses for justifications of adultery in the movie. There are none. In fact, the film goes quite to quite lengths to establish it. Indeed, it's the opposite. Actually, everything is really cool at home. Like, it's all really, really good and nice.
Yeah.
The worst that happens is that Frank sometimes gets too absorbed in the crossword. Like that.
Her son
that
gets
is-
hit by a car.
It's Fred, but
Sorry, the point for me is that I think the film can be successful in its ability to illustrate that even in a situation where there is no quote unquote culturally accepted grounds for the infidelity, that you still feel for the characters. That's a testament again to the
Sure.
interiority of the film.
Yeah.
But my whole thing, and it's more, I guess, more of a semantics point in our larger discussion. I just disagree with the idea that this is an amoral film.
Mhm.
Well, to the one point you were mentioning earlier of like Laura continually like reiterating to herself that she feels bad about this and wondering about the harm that this would do to others, how it would harm her relationship with her husband, her children, the life that she's built. The reason why I find it difficult to believe that even if Laura is continually reinforcing this within her own mind, which I think within sort of the more strict structural cultural context of this film, it's very much a this is what culture or this is what society tells me I should do, and like she's wrestling with that. But the reason why I find it, even if she's saying that, to not necessarily be like the film's perspective on it, is because she doesn't actually ever cause anyone harm, and we never actually see Fred upset in any way. The worst that happens is him saying, it seems like your dream wasn't very good. There's like this moment at in the end where he's like, looks like you were uncomfortable, and like that's when he comes in and comforts her. But the harm that we see done is her being distant, not being present in the moment, and then she has that emotional release. And I think to the point of her having this this infidelity and holding the grief for it, it's a lot more of a future projection of potential grief and potential harm than it is actualized within the world of the film as we see it. Because to Timo's point, and also Abram, to your point, this is a very internal thing. Essentially, no one else actually finds out about it, and no one is ever like, no, what the heck, you shouldn't do this. You like, or is offended or insulted by it. So I just think it's a very internalized thing, and rather than like having actual impact on people.
Here's a point that I have been thinking about this whole review. It didn't occur to me until we actually started recording, but Alec is not just a general practitioner. He is a self-described follower of preventative medicine, which he describes as not necessarily being medicine at all, that it is actually much more related to the conditions of your living, the job that you have, the area that you live in, and the fact that
This guy's a base sociologist.
he's like a sociologist doctor, but okay, he is the one that like takes the action to prevent any of the consequences from coming to fruition by taking the job in South Africa. That he knows that he needs to stop what is going on in order to prevent any further bad, like the actual bad stuff that could happen from coming to fruition. I just think it's very interesting that his character is this one of preventing things to happen rather than letting them come and transpire, which is why we don't see any of these consequences that y'all have been talking about. And kind of that indicates to me like why he decides to take this very difficult step that is of leaving, of saying no to this thing that they both want very badly. It's the societal pressure. It's his own code. But it's interesting that it's his decision. It's not Laura's choice, really. She just goes along with it because she also thinks it's right, even though they have a frank and honest conversation about what they both want out of it. The conclusion is it's got to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like, actually, never mind. I want to talk about secrets. Let's all go around a circle and tell a secret. No. This movie really captures like the like anxiety of lying or keeping a secret really
sure.
well. And I just found that like super involving. Another really involving element of the human drama here. I mean, the scene of her like calling up her friend and being like, "Hey," having to lie to her friend about why she is asking her friend to lie for her. Like there's folds above folds of like the deceit that she is carrying out, which is all lends back to like her like anxiety about the whole situation and her feeling bad that she is pulling people from her life and innocent people that have nothing to do with this to cover up her tracks that she thinks that she is leaving. Like, would her husband have found out about, I forget what the scenario she asks that woman to lie to her about.
That she was with that person at lunch, and that's why she
Yeah.
was out
Like,
later.
Would her husband ever have found out about that? Probably not, but it's like the anxiety.
Actually, I think there's a specific thing there because she mentions that she hasn't seen this friend in a long time in her internal monologue. And when the hell is her husband going to run into a friend that she hasn't seen in a long time?
But it's
so
like,
it's very
it's like
clear that like that's never actually going to come to fruition.
It's like that anxiety and like ideation of like, what if this thing happens and what if he talks to her? Like it's that stuff that spins out when you're in a scenario like that, when you're trying to keep a secret from somebody, or you're trying to make sure somebody doesn't find something out. And there's multiple instances of that. There's another thing that I wrote down that you have to forgive me because I am gonna try and find it here, but I don't know. Did you guys did you guys feel any of that like anxiety that was like building and mounting about the secrecy of the whole film?
Mm-hmm. Some of it. Well, I don't know if that was like the major note that I was being found was being plucked in my heart for this one. I think it was for me more on the romantic chemistry side, and that the anxiety comes from that back and forth of seeing a rather good thing play out on screen, seeing two charismatic, lovely, beautiful people come together and decide that they are very interested in each other, but then this constant reminder that it really isn't in anybody's best interests, or so they think. And that was more of the where I guess have to identify with anxiety in this film. The like secrecy, it definitely is a thing that I think about because it's like the logistics. Oh, now you got to do all these extra steps. Oh, now it's like a lot harder. Ooh, wouldn't it be bad if you got found out?
Yeah.
But I don't think it played a central role in my like for the dynamic and the dynamic of the emotions in the film and between the two main characters.
I found the quote that I was looking for, so I'll read that out here. It's right at the beginning of their relationship when they're going back to their families for the first time, and Laura says, "I knew he wouldn't say anything, and a feeling of danger swept over me."
This I
That, like,
love.
that she knows that he is deciding to keep the secret, and so she must do the same. And now they're involved in this thing together.
That is as such talk about a turning point in a film. The way that the camera moves, the way that Celia Johnson plays that scene, and the way the voiceover is timed to just all in one step after another lead us to a conclusion. The way that the voiceover has us she imagines what he's going to say when he goes home. And she plays it out for a moment. We entertain the thought that this isn't going to be a secret. And then, no, that's highly unrealistic. No, he's not going to do that.
He's not going to say anything.
He's not going to say anything.
We're in this now.
And it's like, and that is just like, boom, now we're in this movie. Like, this is how it's going to be for the rest of it. This is our central dramatic tension. I love how that like naturally evolves, and I don't know, it feels so real. It feels like this is just a circumstance that any one of us could find ourselves in. It'd be, having that moment where it's not necessarily your choice, but you don't want to end the situation, so you have to go along with it.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about the film is it sort of suggests that like an idealized domestic life is still not enough in some
Sure.
ways. Because we have this character in Laura who we learn through small clues is and overt imagery is quite wealthy. You know, they have a cook.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband does quite well. They have a very nice house.
She goes shopping
she's
every week.
She presumably goes shopping every day, and that's I kept asking myself, like, what does she do normally when she's not cheating on her husband?
She makes this weekly Thursday journey into the town to go out to lunch, to buy extravagant things, to go to the movies. It's in some ways quite an ideal life. She has children that she loves. It is a very archetypal Christian lifestyle that she's living.
I will interject one thing, is I don't think she's extravagantly wealthy. There is specifically the moment when she's choosing to purchase a Christmas gift or a birthday gift or whatever for her husband, where she's like, this is way out of my budget. I'm not comfortable spending this money, but I have this wave of relief because I know he'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I also don't think it's ever implied that she's being extravagant with her purchases on a consistent basis, because she's just doing like grocery shopping and like picking up one like library book.
No, but even in that
it's
scene,
also she's like not wealthy in the context of like she's an upper middle class white woman who's like oh this is out of my budget. Like it's definitely a playing with like the cultural context thing.
Again, yeah, even in that context, it's out of her budget, but still on a whim for the enjoyment of her husband, she'll spend the money anyway. That to me doesn't suggest really that they're anyway bad off. But even if you want to just say they're in the top 3%, that's top 1% of Britain, the point is the same. The film is very careful to, and we've mentioned this already, to establish that she lives a life that is ideal. To a certain standard of society. And so I think to build on top of that the notion that for no reason other than some intrinsic internal desire, it's simply not enough, is a compelling proposition to explore. And it's why I this is a sort of like not spiritual in a religious sense, but I think a deeply spiritual film in which we have a character who has to ultimately reckon with her priorities. And I think that is, to me, where a lot of this anxiety comes from. There's a world for her that is safe and comfortable and affluent, and she can keep living. But instead, there's something that attracts her attention beyond that for no reason other than it on its face literally is attractive to her. There's nothing that Alec provides that she doesn't have already. And so I think that is what heightens the anxiety of the narrative as well, because there's no real material reason to be with him. It's a purely emotional, sexual interest. And so that's why, to circle all the way back, but not to reopen the conversation, the reason I'm not concerned with like a practical consequence is that I don't think the film is concerned with practical or material things at all. It's not only interior in that we are living in Laura's head, it's interior in that all of the stakes, the inciting incident, everything is in her mind. There is no reason to be with this guy. And that's what makes it a very compelling movie to me, I think.
I think it also is what makes their relationship so believable, is because watching them meet cute like 3 times before they even have like a serious scene together or do anything. Like they just run into each other a couple times, like, oh, yep, okay, thank you, like, nice to see you, like, I recognize your face, just like barely an acquaintance on the street. Those are good, reasonably charming, like simple scenes. And then watching it evolve as they find chemistry within each other, not even on purpose, I think is incredibly compelling, because there's not any sort of classic romance horseshit set up for why they run into each other, why they are compelled by each other, other than they just have a good time together. And so it makes it feel really natural as they're like, as it builds and they laugh and they go on a little trip together and go on a boat ride, go to the movies, whatever, and they're like just enjoying it. They share a little in-joke about the funny looking woman who playing the organ. Like these are like very simple chemistry driven moments of just like understanding and enjoying someone's company on a very simple personal level. And so as that starts to build and you realize that, to your point, Abram, they're just looking for something in their life, just like does the human desire for experiencing things and emotion or whatever. Watching them like sort of trip into being interested in each other is so natural and so believable. And I think it's really, really a great choice to not have like a a hokey, meet cute, ridiculous moment.
I think that the age of the characters also plays an important role in this relationship, in that it's very decidedly middle-aged. They even, they go so far as in the later part of the movie to say, oh, this just how life is in middle age. But like the casting and the way that I think that plays out is there is something about this later part in life that like is getting to a point of mine of a bit of inability to criticize this movie fully, because I simply haven't lived enough to have the relational like knowledge of what's going on. I can empathize, I can imagine, but
sure,
have I really ever been anywhere near a circumstance like this? No, like honestly, like nowhere near something like this. And so this is like one of the most adult movies that I think I've watched for this show, maybe even in all the movies, simply in its themes and its execution, in the way that it is just so concerned with ideas and plot points that are far outside the conception of many people's lives, or not. I mean, maybe this movie was so popular and it won because it actually really hits on stuff that like everybody thinks about all the time. But for me, there is an element where it's like, I need to live a little longer and then I'll really be able to like fully comfort, like revisit this movie in 10 years. And I think all of us will have new feelings about it, and it might be even better, honestly.
And then you'll be around the age that the actors were when they made this movie. I just looked up their ages. They were like, 33 to 37 or something like that.
That's pretty. I feel a little older on screen, also to me.
Because it's an old movie, they present older. Like, oh, they must be in their 50s.
I know. I'm like, they're in their 50s.
Is Teresa? What do they?
Laura?
What do they say?
Laura?
Celia Johnson?
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Jeez.
Teresa. She was like, or she is 5 years older than Trevor Howard was when they filmed this. So yeah, well, and for their entire lives mostly.
Well, we don't know like when one of them died. Like if
you keep getting older after you die, right?
No,
that's tough to say.
What?
That's hard to say.
I guess we do like celebrate George Washington's like 170 billionth birthday or whatever. But like
in a literal sense, yes, you do get older even if after you're dead.
Time has passed. Yes. Wait, do you get old?
I want to talk about. Tucker started a little bit about the actual relationship, the moments that Laura and Alec actually share, because I think obviously those are like very romantic scenes that are the beating heart of the movie. They're very strong. Each and every one is really deep and feels unique, obviously, because these moments are fleeting and precious to these two characters.
Yeah.
And they range from like your more standard seemingly more standard rom-com things of like, they run into each other at a shop and they share a laugh at like a funny looking cellist player or whatever, and then they have the rowboat and he falls out of the rowboat. No, his trousers are all wet.
That's definitely a more classic moment there.
But then we go to like this boathouse scene where they're like, we shouldn't be doing this, and he has this line that's like, has it been a long time for you since we last saw each other a week ago? I know it has been so long for me. And like we just hard shift into these things that are like, oh, this is far different than a lot of the standard romantic fare of the mid 20th century in film. So yeah, a lot of the scenes are like that. I mean, the trip that they take and the second time they go on it is so much more. They're not talking at all. It is all Laura's voiceover, and like, we didn't talk. It was there's a silent trip. We were mostly just kind of lamenting or sort of grieving the time that we had left. his time moves so quickly on this last trip and all this stuff. Like these moments feel, I just go back to the word I said earlier, precious in the film and to the characters.
I like how Laura is not a reliable narrator too. She leaves things out that she was like there and awake and present for. She will not tell us. She's like, and we stood on the bridge for what seemed like forever, but then it got dark and we had to go home. It's like, well, you just stood there, like you didn't do anything else. That you're just like hiding from us. I think that this film is very coy.
Smooched.
They smooched.
They snogged. They smooched. They macked.
About the actual like sexual advances that these characters put on each other. Like it needs to be like, no, they don't ever have sex for the code. But I think that the film really likes to play in this like gray area, as it does with all its other themes of like, well, yeah, but it could be, but it could be like, oh, we have a little closed door thing that's not so obvious. But then in the apartment scene, it actually is very clearly like, no, they don't get to be together. And denying the characters that opportunity like leads us into the third act of the film. Or I guess that apartment scene like is squarely within the third act of the film.
Yeah.
Two quick lines that I want to mention, and then I want to talk about the end.
Yeah, and we got to talk about our favorite shot. We got to talk about the shot.
There's things like, the boathouse scene that I mentioned before, Laura keeps insisting there's still time to be sensible, and Alec is very realistic about it. He's like, there's no time. There's no time left at all for that to be the case.
We're already off that cliff.
Yeah. There's a moment after that boathouse scene when she's going back on the train. It reflects, literally reflects her face and reflects a moment earlier where she says when Alec is talking about his passions, some of the stuff that he's passionate about, he feels or looks younger to her. And I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it was some sort of early effects thing, but like her reflection when she's recounting that moment in the boathouse or sort of talking about how she loves Alec now or the feelings that she has about him, she looked younger in the reflection to me. I don't know if anybody else caught that. I doubt it. It's probably just a me thing, but like she looked younger to me than she does.
I do think that there is something in terms of the performance and perhaps makeup. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Where their demeanor in any given scene can drastically change the way you're perceiving their age. I think specifically of the hard cut from the frame narrative to like the main chunk of time that the movie takes place in, as the voiceover starts up and she begins to reflect, and we cut to her be like, and I was walking down the street going shopping as I do every Thursday, and we see her just like there's a smile on her face, her eyes are a little bit wider, she's standing up a little bit straighter, because to that point we've only seen her like hunched over, like eyes defocused in a chair, and she looks 20 years younger. When you hard cut to her just like walking down the street, like smiling at people, like going to get a book, like she's just like...
It's probably a performance thing, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a really impressive element of her performance, and in the subtle ways that it actually does when you really like reflect on these moments, the range that she's given to work with, because I mean, I think the most impressive part of her performance is the moments in which on screen, the mise en scène, she's just zoned out. And like there's so much emotion in her eyes of just like thinking. And of course, that is certainly helped. The emotion is helped by being able to hear her narration reflect on whatever the moment is. But there are just these moments where lighting, cinematography, performance, and the script are all working together in tandem. And I think especially when she's just like gets totally zoned out. The dialogue on the narration is reflecting this, and then the camera zooms in slightly, and the lights dim behind her. And I'm like, ooh,
lighting gag. I love it. I love the lighting gag. This film is quite advanced, honestly, filmmaking wise, technology wise.
Well, I think the director's pretty good.
Well, you remember? I think to go into the shots a little bit. I think the most impressive shot of the movie is not the tilty one that we're gonna get to in a second, but is when she's like imagining a life that she has with Alex, and it's reflected in the train window, and we see it like passing by.
Yeah,
it follows the reflection thing.
And then it fades in. A like outside the window, but you can still kind of see things passing through the train. Like
Mhm.
they're like dancing or doing whatever. And then there's this other moment where she's sitting there and thinking about things, and we get this really interesting like scene fade where in the foreground is actually her sitting in the chair with her husband, but it's like whatever going on in the background.
Yeah.
And then it fades out and then her husband is there. I'm like, what the heck? Like that's such a cool way to
Yeah.
transition and like keep you in the mindset of the character. I'm like, that's primo stuff.
Yeah.
Let's talk about mindset of the character, the Dutch angle. This is like the best, most well-placed use of Dutch, in my opinion. It is so clear what this is supposed to communicate to the audience. She is standing there, and her whole world just, very slowly, very smooth. It's like, there's nothing about it to like take you out of just the pure emotion, and just this pit that develops in my stomach when that shot comes out, that something fundamental is changing in her mind. This is a different world. She's going to do something very out there. I mean it's obvious, I think, that she wants to kill herself in this moment. Well, she says it earlier. She says,
I didn't do it.
no, she says, I want to die. She just says it quite plainly.
yeah.
And then he says, if you died, you'd forget me. I want to be remembered.
And so there's this back and
Good
forth with the
moment.
characters, but then he leaves. We're now just with the talkative lady, and the Dutch communicates everything you need to know. We stay Dutch as she walks outside.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
The train, it's like pure visual language that works just amazingly. And then we go back.
The angle syncs up to the whistle, like really like powering in as the train is arriving. Yeah.
It's
the steam hits her face. Yeah.
chef's kiss.
It's also so effective because there's just simply nothing else like it in the film at all.
Yeah.
It's a technique saved for a singular moment.
And it's not, I don't think like Dutch angles are all that flashy, to be honest. I don't think you're going above what is like the visual scope of the film to do that. It's just smart language use. It doesn't feel out of place whatsoever, even though it's the only time we ever see it in the film. It makes perfect sense to me that it's there.
Yeah.
I remember watching that happen and thinking about it. I'm like, God, that was awesome. Why hasn't this been ripped off in every goddamn movie I've ever seen? Just the slow into Dutch, keeping it and then snapping back as she like snaps to reality. I'm like, that's so good. It's like so clever.
She like because she's running out of the door, and like the camera is essentially placed on where the tracks would be, and she gets close to the camera, and it's just really good blocking and spacing and direction of her like running straight up to the thing, and then the steam blowing everything back. And then, like Tucker said, the snap back to reality. Well, there goes gravity.
Space Ford or whatever fucking loses.
We need.
And
we
then
know
she
the
follows
space
up with this
pretty
line.
well too. We like the geography of this location is very
times,
established by this point in the film.
She follows it up with, she didn't do it, not necessarily because she was like, oh, my life, I actually do love it, but she's like, she doesn't give an answer of like why she didn't jump out onto the tracks necessarily. She's like, and in that moment, I didn't. It's not that I wanted to die. It's just I had a desire not to feel unhappy anymore. I had a desire not to feel anything, and she doesn't rationalize her snap decision. She just doesn't do it, and that's like another really emotionally fraught, complex thing that is just kind of like served up to the audience and not necessarily feeling we have to answer it or reconcile it or something like that. It's what makes this film feel so unique to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As for getting our scores in, just the very last thing I'll say, and obviously we have already talked about the use of a lot of dissolve and a lot of very clever editing. I think ultimately it goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of the film, and this applies also to the Dutch shot. Everything happens in service of this core conflict.
Yeah.
And I think that it's rare to be able to craft a film that is so singular in its interest that every dimension of the filmmaking and performance relate back to it. And in doing so, it feels so captivating. I think that it's a very singularly captivating film.
Yeah, absolutely.
True that.
I will close on my final thing to sort of reflect on what Timo was mentioning earlier about the age at which we're at lacking certain life experience or personal experience to relate to something like this, I found this film interestingly captivating on a personal reason. And there's only one other time this has happened to me, and I just want to make sure I mention this to sort of reflect why I'm giving this film such a high score that I am, is that this film is coming at an interesting time in my life in which I've just experienced a change in my romantic life. I experienced a breakup of 3 years. And it's something that happened very naturally. There was no conflict or anything. But I'm currently experiencing the how will this impact me going forward? Something that happened in my life and now is no longer there. And how do I struggle with thinking about that and wanting to move forward and feeling these emotions and crying sometimes at night as I remember certain things and like, is that should I be crying? Should I not? And like the sort of like guilt for feeling emotions. That is what I got out of this movie is being emotional, being not sure why, and then feeling guilt for your emotions and wrestling with that. That's what this movie is about for me. And I mentioned that I've only ever had this happen to me, like personally relate to sort of like a element of romance in a movie, and that was with Promising Young Woman, a movie that we reviewed a couple years ago, which also came at a personally a change in my personal life that movie really keyed me into. But this movie was like interestingly cathartic for me to come at a certain time, and it just made me think about how art is, for me, the only way for art to be truly great on a personal level is to meet you at a time in your life with its themes that really personally engage with you. And this was a case of that, where I was like standing there at my kitchen counter eating an apple, and I was like, "Whoa!" I had the like camera zoom out and be like,
the Dutch angle slowly tilted.
But yeah, it was just an interesting sort of like, damn.
Yeah. If you want the palm details for this, go watch our reviews for Torment or Rome Open City or Red Meadows, and we have many other opportunities to go over the 1945 palm details in the coming episodes. So,
yes, let's find out what we give this film. You ready? 3,
yes,
2, 1, go. Okay. Oh, wow. So we have a tie, but we do not have a big tie. It's just with one film.
Phew.
This is getting a very high score. I'll give it you that. I'll tell you it now. 9.2 is what this film received. The point breakdown is Abram gave it an 8.5, Tanner gave it a 9, I gave it a 9.5, and Tucker gave it a 9.8. So
yes,
up there at the top of our list. 9.
I should have given it a 10 because then it would have just been.
Yeah, should have given it a 10. I, Daniel Blake, is the only other film to have received a 9.2 on our list. Another emotional film, another British film. How do we think about these two as they stack up?
I go Daniel Blake above, but of course I gave Daniel Blake a 10.
You gave Daniel Blake a 10.
Yes.
I don't Daniel Blake.
I'm gonna go with Abram on this one. I give Daniel Blake the top spot on the list. Even though I have a higher ranking for this film, Daniel Blake was just that gut punch that hit me. Like, I really haven't seen a film in recent memory.
I remember you talking about like crying after you watched that movie.
That movie got to me. And while I really like this one, and I just am like in love with the filmmaking of Brief Encounter, and want to just steal all the techniques for my own stuff, the emotions just aren't the same.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Now I'm a big burly manly man, so I don't cry after movies. But based on for simplicity's sake, and to go with the scores that I gave, I'm gonna go Daniel Blake above.
So,
all right,
there we have it. Brief Encounter is going to go at spot number 3 on the list, way up there at the top. Spot number 3, the top. Well, we'll go through the top 5. Why not? Maybe the top 10, just to remind you. It's been a little while of what's at the.
Fuck it, go through all of them.
Yeah,
all right.
We got time.
Starting at number 1, it's Parasite, then I, Daniel Blake, then Brief Encounter, then Anatomy of a Fall, followed by The Conversation, then Taxi Driver, The Pianist, The Road, which is Yol, the Turkish movie that we watched. No, that was Iranian.
No,
that one was.
No, you're right.
It was Turkish. But at spot number 9, you've got Uncle Boon Me, who recalls his past lives. Then 10 is Umbrellas of Cherbourg, followed by Rome Open City.
We don't need to go. That top 10 is fine. Top 10 is fine.
There you go. That's the top of the list.
Abram's evil.
Abram puts a thought. He's got that little mind control device. He just says to do something, and I'll do it. Beep. Well, Tanner, warm those pipes up.
I'm ready.
Warm them
Ma-ma-ma-ma-ma.
pipes up.
I just hope everyone at home is holding space for the lyrics of the Wheel song.
I still don't know what that means.
Holding space.
You'll figure it out when you're older, Abram.
Get that.
When
get
you're
that
middle-aged or
therapy
whatever.
talk out of here, man.
Yeah, when I watch Wicked in 10 years, I'll get it.
Whoa, buddy. Try a couple months. Alrighty. Pull up the wheel, Timo. Pull up the wheel.
Can't fucking believe John Chu is favored for Best Director nomination of a Disney film.
Don't listen
that's
to
horseshit.
Variety. They don't know what the hell
nonsense.
they're
That's not
talking
fucking
about.
happening.
Yeah, Variety has awful Oscar predictions. Don't listen to them. Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
And the
I just feel
deal
like I should
is
start squealing.
we should all squeal along. Number 27. Number 27.
I see.
Oh, what
Well-
film is that now?
We will not be leaving the British Isles quite yet, gentlemen. Since we are going to a film from 1968, starring Malcolm McDowell, David Wood, Richard Warwick, and Christine Noonan. This is Lindsay Anderson's If.
If
If ...
If
not
dot,
the
dot,
John
dot.
Krasinski
this year.
movie.
No,
Abram.
If.
I've seen If. It's been a while. It's about rambunctious British schoolboys.
Yes, it's Schoolboys. It's I don't really know much about it. It's a
Okay.
precursor, obviously, Malcolm McDowell for like Clockwork Orange.
I see.
Kind of what he was known for before that film. So
They've,
I'll be interested to check it out. I've heard good things.
at the local art house film theater here in Austin, they've got a big giant Italian If poster. It's really big.
Oh.
So that's what I know this movie from.
Sure.
It.
Right.
If it was Italian, if I don't. We're just spitballing.
Okay. Well,
Alrighty. That's all from us. Stay tuned to Backlot Banter for more movie content. Write your thoughts on this film down below. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you're inspired to watch it. If you were inspired to watch it, let us know on whatever episode you want to write on. We read them all. That's going to have to do it from us tonight. Thank you for watching. And you know what I say? Stay cool. Keep warm. Peace.
Peace out.